purpose of government is to facilitate, not to dictate. It should be, as Ayn Rand said, I think fairly eloquently, the only moral justification for government is to provide an environment in which its citizens can flourish through its merits and enjoy their inalienable rights of life, liberty, ownership of property, and the pursuit of happiness under the rule of law. I'm paraphrasing, but I think that's a very succinct description of the purpose of government. It ought to be limited both at a local and state level, but definitely on a federal level, and just provide an atmosphere for its citizens to succeed under the rule of law. You know, I'm quite pleased with the direction we've gone as a state with regard to taxation. We've eliminated 6 different tiers of a progressive tax, gone down to a 5% flat tax. That means less of a burden on those who are carrying a disproportionate amount before. I think for a family, if I recall the statistics, with an income of $100,000, it's an effective tax rate of about 4%. For a family making up to $70,000, an effective tax rate of about 3%. And by eliminating credits and earned income tax credits and other credits, I think we've simplified the tax system here, and the federal government could look to Utah as a template for how to do it better. First of all, let me say, I think the federal government shouldn't be involved much, if at all, as far as choices on the state level regarding education. Programs like No Child Left Behind, which are one-size-fits-all, large government bureaucratic messes, don't help the states. The states understand their issues and their needs best. And then in turn, states should not dictate choices. I think the best environment is to create one where parents have multiple viable options to best suit the needs of their children and their families. So for instance, in my neighborhood we have families that enjoy public schools, we have families that enjoy private schools, charter schools, home schools, and all of those options I believe are viable, and state government should again facilitate and create an environment where all of those programs have an opportunity to provide the best education for the citizens of Utah and their children. Brandon, the answer to that is emphatically no. There isn't room for other laws outside of the Constitution. I've spent my entire career studying and applying the Utah United States Constitution, and that's the bedrock of our jurisprudence system and our legal heritage. I know the 10th Circuit just recently upheld a ban on Oklahoma's attempt to outlaw Sharia law, and outside of the Establishment Clause issues, I just don't think religious law at all should be a part of or considered under civil law or criminal law for that matter, but there is not a reason why we need to stray from the guiding principles that our founding fathers gave us in the Constitution. Again, I think the key to self-sufficiency when it comes to energy is liberating our lands from the control of the federal government. It's commonly known that almost 66%, 67% of Utah lands are controlled by the federal government. What's not commonly known is that the federal government likely does not have legal standing to have those lands. And there are a couple of bills in this session that are being crafted to be able to exercise eminent domain, the 10th Amendment, and the Enclave Clause, which is Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. And that is that the federal government shouldn't have right to these lands and access to the lands unless they do it with permission and purchasing it from the legislature. So permission from the legislature, they have to buy it, which they haven't done. And unless, and there's an exception, which is the enclave of these are forts or certain types of military installations. Well, that's not the case with the majority of these lands. And if we could harness the great natural treasures while being respectful to the open lands and the natural beauty that we have, Utah's energy problems would be solved for generations. In addition to that, and I might just add that that's such a key issue, a lot of our educational needs too are tied into that, because the federal lands block access to a lot of our SITLA lands, the lands that we have in trust for public education, and we can't reap the benefits fully of those unless we are afforded access. And in certain cases, and I know the state right now has lawsuits to preserve access to a number of those SITLA lands. I think those are the 2774 roads that we had that we're trying to get in that are grandfathered to allow access to be able to continue to have the money that we need for our children's future. I think the easy answer for that, and a correct answer, would be Islamic fundamentalism. And that's a culture that directly threatens not just American exceptionalism, but the existence of our culture and our society as we know it. However, I think it's an even more perhaps threatening element from within our own society, and that is this notion of a culture of entitlement or expectation. And once again, this is a liberal progressive idea that tells us that that we, outside of our inalienable rights, deserve certain things in life. And I think the pioneer spirit of Utah understands that very well, is that you work hard for things, you work hard and you earn what you get, and you don't deserve anything outside of those inalienable rights. Just a quick example, I was serving on a congressional commission and we were reviewing a particular project that they wanted funded, and I said, great, the idea sounds good, but let's fund this with private funds. Why do it through the taxpayers, strapping that burden on the people? And the response from it was a bipartisan commission, but the response from the liberals was, well, other groups similarly situated have received funds, so we deserve it. We're entitled to it. It wouldn't be fair otherwise. And again, it's that notion of fairness, that everything has to be equal in order to be fair, that I think is really at the root of disintegrating American exceptionalism. As a follow-on to my last answer, I think government should not be picking winners or losers. Government should not be dictating to the market. Unfortunately, the progressive agenda for many years has been that too. It's a very patronizing, parochial view that the government knows best. So government at its best should stay out of government. I think there was a phrase by Ronald Reagan, said the 9 most frightening words are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. And so for me, keeping the federal government especially out of the business of state government is paramount. It's something that I would advocate for and defend if I were elected as Attorney General. As far as when the government might be able to help private enterprise, in limited situations, perhaps a tax credit to create an environment, again, not to pick winners or losers, but to create an environment whereby the state would benefit from business it wouldn't otherwise have, and that business doesn't affect or hurt any other businesses. So, for instance, in the film industry, to create a tax credit where we're getting a percentage of money that we wouldn't otherwise have, it's better than getting 100% of nothing. So in limited situations, I think government can act as a catalyst to spur some economic growth. Separation of church and state. And the Constitution says that the government won't pass laws that respect an establishment of one religion over the other. It's the establishment part of that, and that it won't prohibit free exercise of worship of one's religion, the free exercise component of that. What it means to me is that we still misunderstand the doctrine a little bit. I think the terms separation of church and state, which aren't even found in the Constitution, have been misapplied for a long time. I don't think the Founding Fathers intended to read out God entirely from civic duties and from government functions. And it's sad to me that we just blindly accept that that's the doctrine of the day, and even though that's been the jurisprudential history. I would say that there are, and here's a good example, a young man who wants to pray, as long as the government is not forcing him to pray to a particular God, if he wants to pray in school voluntarily, then he should be allowed to do that. Many cases have struck those types of laws down which would allow that. So prayer in school, why? If you look at the actual doctrine, it never was intended to be that way. One other case recently with the crosses, memorializing the fallen troopers. That's a case that I think was wrongly decided. And again, as Attorney General, it's just another area where I feel like we would have to stand up. Clearly that the idea of spirituality does not need to be, government does not need to be devoid of spirituality. But understand that there are limitations, and that's what it means to me.